Hello, everyone. This is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decaturish.com. You are watching the June 19th Decaturish Twitch show. We tape every Wednesday and Friday at 6 o'clock. Sometimes we have special editions like we did last night when the Decatur Confederate Monument came down. It was really cool. Our intern Alex Brown was there, was shooting some live video for us. So if you want to see that video, give us a follow. Check out some of our old videos. And you can see that and some other live videos that we've done. Our guests for today are Crystal Jarvis, who's a journalist who also specializes in writing about the job market. And she is an old dear friend of mine. We used to work together in Anniston a lifetime ago. Crystal, how are you?
Great. How are you today, Dan? Thank you for having me.
Happy Juneteenth. Glad.
Happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
Very much. Glad that you're here. Hans Utz is a columnist for Decaturish. She's joining us once again. Hans, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking.
And Lane Flynn is the chair of the DeKalb County Republican Party. How are you, Lane?
Doing good, Dan. Thanks for having me today.
Great. And George Cheedy, our columnist, is going to be jumping in just a bit. He just joined the chat. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. You know, we've got elections news, we've got COVID news. George Cheedy is live somewhere. George, where the heck are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Where are you?
So I am calling in from a march that is taking place in Grant Park, amongst the Grant Park Neighborhood Association.
Is it a march about Rashard Brooks or Black Lives Matter?
It's a sort of it's a general, like, yeah, it's a Rashard Brooks, but it's mostly, it's like there's a lot of Juneteenth Black Lives Matter going on here.
Gotcha.
Like, if there is a purpose to the march, like, I will tell you what, when I ask somebody who can explain that in more detail. Kenya.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Meet Kenya Edwards.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
This is Decaturish.
Hi, how are you? I've read your publication many times. How can I help you?
Well, we were wanting to know what's the purpose of your event today?
This is the Juneteenth Festival and March for Grant Park. We're also incorporating BLM in this.
Awesome. Well, happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
And how many people are out there today?
Right now we're about close to 150, but it's going every minute.
George, I think we lost your video.
Maybe. Let me check. Let me see. We're still here. We're good.
I can hear you. I can't see you.
All right, let me see. I'll fix it.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, there we are. No, we're good. We're good.
It's live video, everybody.
Are we back?
We're back.
Yeah, we're back.
Hi.
Hey. Good to see you.
So, yes. Is Hans in, or is it just you and I?
It's Hans.
Oh, no.
It's my friend Crystal Jarvis and Lane Flynn, who's the chair of the DeKalb County GOP.
Oh, fabulous. All right, good stuff.
It's quite a panel. How many people are out there right now, George?
So I want to say about 150, give or take. The mostly Grant Parkers,
Okay.
the Grant Parkees.
Cool. Well,
Is there? Are they going to march down to the precinct?
I believe they will, actually.
Interesting.
Let's dive in real quick. So we just got some news a little bit ago that the DeKalb County Board of Elections has asked the Secretary of State to delay certification of the June 9th primary, which had been delayed twice because of COVID and everything else. Apparently somebody tested positive for COVID at the elections board and they had to shut everything down. And Lane, you're probably closer to the ground than any of us because you're probably dealing with candidates. What are you hearing about that from your candidates?
Well, I don't know. It's not so much the candidates, but the Democrats and Republicans both have two members on the the elections and registration board, and both parties also send volunteers to help with absentee ballot counting, and to supervise and to sort of decide when there's questionable ballots, what the correct vote is. And normally that's all done on election night, as soon as the polls close. Of course, this election we had a ton of absentee ballots, far more than any previous election here. So that's been an ongoing process starting the week before the election, when they allowed them to start counting, and ongoing, to this day, which is why we don't have elections certified. So from our end, it's been kind of a scramble, kind of finding out at the last minute, hey, we need volunteers for another day to help make sure everything's counted fairly and correctly. And it's tough for everybody, because this is the first time we've ever done anything like this in Georgia. Had widespread, large numbers of people voting absentee, having the government encourage people to vote absentee. So I have tried to be, very non-critical of the elections offices not getting things done maybe as fast as we would like, or maybe not doing things as smoothly as we'd like them to do, because this is really totally an unprecedented situation. I think it's been hard for them. It's been hard for us in terms of having volunteers. And there's the factor that it's a primary election, and we, at least the GOP, didn't have a lot of competitive races on the ballot. The Democrats, had some more, but we're not. The presidential primaries is basically already decided by the time we got to this ballot. The Democrats, of course, had one statewide Senate primary that drove a lot of turnout. But it's a different situation from a general election. So it hadn't been anything that I would say is a concern. It's just something where we're all trying to do the best we can to get this done and get everybody's vote counted.
George, what are you hearing from your sources over at the elections board? Now, George was actually a poll watcher on June 9th, so he got to see them with that big pile of ballots that they had to count for a week.
So I got to say, oh boy, I was exposed to COVID then. That's lovely.
Oh, yeah.
But I just got a negative test, so I should be fine.
Woo-hoo.
Literally, I got my test results back yesterday.
DeKalb County Health Board is a sponsor of Decaturish. Go get your test.
Thank God. Because I don't want to pay for this stuff. I'm not shocked that they when I realized they were still counting Wednesday morning, technically they're supposed to be done. They need to certify a week after the election. So I'm not surprised that they've got to file for an extension. That's not surprising at all. The sheer number of votes, the sheer 100,000 people mailing in stuff, 10 people aren't going to be able to get through that in a week. That's not realistic. The whole situation, I have tremendous sympathy, believe it or not, for the elections board. There's no precedent to this. This isn't normal. There's no predicting any of this. On some level, I want to hold them harmless. I'm not looking to cut off heads right now, but one has to ask: is this what this is going to be like now? Because I think now that people have got a taste of mailing in a ballot, they're going to want to do it. They're just going to keep doing it. And frankly, I think it's a good idea. So this is the moment to go through the pain and adjust.
Quick show of hands. Who voted by mail? Who voted by mail? Quick show of hands. I did. Yep.
So let me ask a question though, because it's not like the ballots. It's not like those absentee ballots showed up on the 9th, right? I mean, those have been coming in for weeks, and so it feels a little bit to me like there should have been some sense of the quantity of people they needed to have in place to be counting them prior to the count starting, even a week in advance. I mean, you probably had at least half of the ballots in by the week prior, right? I mean, I'm speculating, so if I'm wrong, please tell me, but I would presume you had a substantial number of the ballots in. And when I say you, everyone, I don't mean anyone specifically on this call, but in general, it feels to me like we should have had a view into how many needed to be counted, and that maybe 10 people weren't going to be enough.
I don't disagree with that. I'm certainly not saying the office did everything right in my opinion. As I said, I'm sort of willing to understand that, as George said, this is totally unprecedented, and calling for heads to roll is probably not the most useful thing. But yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bit more advanced preparation and bring more people and let us know. I will be honest that, we have not gotten, as far as the DeKalb GOP or me, has not gotten a ton of communication as far as what we need. So I'll get calls from other people who are at the elections office, and they'll say, hey, we need a volunteer for tonight. We're adding another room to count. We need somebody to watch that room. And, it'll be 3:00 and they're starting the count at 4:30. And it's tough to get somebody to volunteer for a 6-hour night shift with 90 minutes notice. So I will say I do wish there had been a little more thought and work with your community partners who, also have an interest in making sure all the votes are, counted correctly and in an expeditious manner.
Well, if you're just joining us, this is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of Decaturish.com. This is Decaturish.com Twitch show. If you want to ask a question, please create a Twitch account and give us a follow and throw your question in the chat. Our guests today are Crystal Jarvis, who's a journalist who writes about the job market, Hans Utz, who is a columnist for Decaturish, Lane Flynn, who is the chair of the DeKalb County GOP, and George Cheedy, who is a Decaturish columnist and seemingly everywhere all the time. He even showed up in our Twitch last night, and you weren't even supposed to be on the Twitch. It was just amazing. We were like, "There's George. He's on the Alex Brown had you on the Instagram." Man in many places.
I am ubiquitous. I am everywhere.
So, Crystal, I want to touch on a piece you did for us. Hey, Sarah. Sarah writes for us too. Sarah covers the school board for us. Good to see you. Crystal, I wanted to ask you about your Juneteenth story.
Okay.
You did a quick turnaround on that for us. We have never written about it before. We wanted to. I guess it was as much for my own education as anything else. But did you learn anything about Juneteenth in the reporting of the piece that maybe you didn't know before?
So one of the things that I found very interesting was I was speaking. This is actually something that I was planning to actually talk to you about, but of course, and not to say that all African Americans may have knew it in depth. I think first I want to say that there is definitely a renewed kind of proud sense of pride and really us wanting to delve into our culture more and celebrate something like this because it's very important to us, especially with a lot of what we're going through right now. As we see, George is somewhere right now where we are marching and protesting, and so there's definitely a great feeling because this is kind of our Freedom Day, as they have called it. It's basically a day. What I have actually seen on a lot of different across social media was something that was kind of reported, or it's being kind of reported inaccurately, is that a lot of people say Juneteenth is the day that all slaves were freed. That's
1 second. Hey, George. George, can you mute your mic for a little bit, please?
Take care of it. Gotcha.
Yeah. Or I can mute you.
Okay. No, that's
sorry,
okay.
Crystal.
No. So one of the things
Crystal, I can't hear you.
Can you not hear me now? Did everybody
mute yourself?
I can hear Crystal. Can you hear me? I'm talking at you.
Yeah, I hear you.
No, I can't hear anybody.
We all can hear you,
second.
Dan.
Technical difficulties, everybody. Be right back.
All right, because I just unmuted it.
Okay. Hey,
can you hear me now?
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Now I'm gonna mute it again. Let's see what happens.
All right. I turned my headset down. I don't know how I did that. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Crystal, you were saying. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I'll repeat your question so basically you were asking, was there anything new that I learned in the process of writing the story about Juneteenth, which I absolutely enjoyed writing. So one of the things that I will first start off by saying is that what I've been seeing across social media is a lot of people say this is today the day to celebrate all African Americans being free in America. So one clarification is it wasn't that a lot of other places hadn't freed their slaves. What happened was this particular day was the day that Texan slaves or slaves in Texas were freed because their slave the slave owners there wanted to get in another harvest before they told them. So basically, what happened was Texas became this place to where a lot of um, a lot of slave owners were actually shipping their slaves, all of their slaves, off from other places in the South, like Alabama and Tennessee and Georgia, to Texas so that for safekeeping. So basically they were shipping them off so that because in some of those other places that were invaded by the Union, they were freeing them as they did it, but it was harder for the Union to get to Texas. So there were a lot of slaves that were in Texas that the Union hadn't gotten to Texas yet, and so that's how they ended up basically once they landed and got there by ship and landed and they freed them, that's when they were freed. So that's why Juneteenth is celebrated, because it honors the day that all slaves across the U.S. Were freed. So one of the things that I want to say that I definitely knew a lot about Juneteenth, but one of the things that I'm very interested in, and I was actually going to talk to you about, Dan, so we'll have this conversation later, is a lot of people don't really understand, as far as other colleagues that I've spoke to about this. A lot of white people can trace their history back to very far. I had a professor I've had this conversation with a lot of different times, and he could go as far back as when his family lived in London and what the name of the boat that they got on to come, to embark on a new journey here in America. I can't trace my history as far back as my great grandparents. So, with that being said, I think with Juneteenth, there's a renewed hope in just, a lot of rights for African Americans, but also it's renewing some of kind of like my passion. I've done this before. I've literally been in different courthouses throughout Alabama looking up census data. There's a lot of things that's very interesting is because a lot of African Americans were illiterate and, weren't allowed to read and write it sometimes. They would spell their names wrong. So in the census, when you look it up, you could have family members that you're related to with kind of completely different names. For example, my grandmother's maiden name was Waiters, Waiter, but some of them spelled it Waters. I mean, so it's just a lot of red tape in what we do. And one of the things that when I spoke to one of the sources that I spoke to was, talking about how the archives that's in the Flat Rock community, they help people to kind of be able to figure out how to research their history. So it's not necessarily anything that I learned, but just kind of what I would love to do is continue to help people learn how they could kind of go farther back into their own history, because it helps us to kind of know where we came from. It helps give us, inspiration to continue down the tracks that we may be going, or it helps us to understand who we are. I remember the woman that I spoke with, she said that she was a rebel in some aspects, and not necessarily a rebel, but she definitely was a protester, and she fought for her rights in the 60s and 70s, and her grandmother told her, you're just like one of my aunts. And it was like it's one of those feelings to where you start to understand who you are and where you come from. And it helps you, moving forward with continuing to build a legacy for your family and your future. So I think that's one of the great things that was interesting for me.
One of the things that I learned from your story was the significance of slave cemeteries.
Right.
And how they're actually somewhat of a sacred space in terms of can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that was the most interesting part of the story to me. Personally.
I think what basically what she was saying, I think I know that there was a lot going on as far as race wars and riots, and what would happen is, their Black communities would be burned down at times, and those cemeteries would and churches were actually left untouched sometimes. Or, well, a lot of times they did. And so they became kind of like a sacred space for them. And it was where our ancestors were. So a lot of Black communities developed their own rituals and different customs as to how they lay their loved ones to rest, and then they marked the graves in certain way with rocks, because sometimes they couldn't afford headstones to know who it was when they came back. So those are very interesting. So it's very interesting to kind of see that and know that a cemetery means so much to a community, and means so much to, and then they even do reenactments of what it would be like to go to a funeral back in the 1800s and 1900s, even down to the way they dressed. So that was very interesting. But yes, I mean, it's so funny because even within my own family, my great grandmother is actually 104 years old.
Oh, God bless her.
Yeah. And she actually owns a cemetery from part of where we're from. So she that was one of the things that was very important to her. And when she saw that it was for sale, she took advantage of that and bought it. But it's because it holds so much value to us. And it's one of the things to where I'm going to speak for a lot of people when I say this, but it's one of the things, that's why a lot of African Americans actually like to do the burial process. It's kind of like they don't get cremated a whole lot. So that's part of the reason, I think, is because it has just become a part of what's sacred and important to us in terms of saying goodbye to our loved ones.
George, you were at the monument last night when they were taking it down, and it was a neat event, and Hans was as well. It was a neat event because it came down right around midnight, which was the start of Juneteenth. And George, I wanted to hear from you. What did that mean to you personally, just standing there and being able to watch that? And you are still on mute, by the way.
So, yeah. Let me first start by saying that the march has begun.
Okay.
We can hear.
Yes.
And so you're asking me, like, what did it mean for me personally to be watching this monument fall in the middle of the night? So I got to tell you, the thing that's been on my mind a lot as I've been looking at it is, where was the temporary injunction? Where was the emergency injunction? Like, so normally, like, what you would expect is that the Sons of Confederate Veterans see Judge Seeliger's order, go, yeah, that's probably not going to be sustained, and then go file for a temporary emergency injunction in the first appellate court they can find, and drag it out. Like, that's what I was expecting. It's $200 and an hour to file it. And like, would generally be an emergency injunction on spot. Nobody filed it.
Yeah, I was
they had
looking
5
for
days. And so I'm looking around and I'm like thinking, like, so the CEO, Michael Thurman, has got to look at this, and he's a historian on top of everything else. He's looking at this going, they're not filing. It's a gimme. Give it to me. They're gonna let me get away with it, like, on purpose. And that's what I'm thinking right now, is that the Republican Party and Republican legislators, who are typically afraid to death of sort of radical conservative, Confederate, neo-Confederate, whatever, said, go ahead and do it. Like, if you didn't put up a defense, it's okay. Maybe they're just giving this one to you. And they took it. Like it was like there's a deliberateness here. like where the Republican legislature doesn't want their fingerprints on being responsible for the removal of a monument, like where they don't have to look, where they look like they're not defending it. Do you know what I mean?
Well, as it so happens, we have a member of the Republican Party on our panel today. So let's ask Lane. Lane, let me get your reaction to what George is saying here.
Well, I would not say that I would agree that there's some kind of plot, or that there's machinations behind, or a strategy behind letting things, not go challenged or whatever. I frankly don't think there's much appetite, even amongst mainstream Republicans these days, for defending Confederate monuments. It's just one part of what I think has been, certainly to me, a very surprising and very rapid shift in sort of the center of where a lot of Republicans are on matters that are related to racism and historical, say, wrongs against the African American community. You can always get on Facebook or Twitter and find the radicals to protest literally any subject you could think of. But in terms of a monument, especially in DeKalb County, DeKalb Republicans are not going to be the same as the Republicans in Rome, Georgia, or in maybe, rural counties that are 50, 100 miles outside of Atlanta. And there's, that's just not something that I'm sure there's some people who will complain or say it's destroying history. I don't happen to agree that that's the case, and to my understanding, nothing is being destroyed. They're moving it and they're relocating it, and I think that's pretty quickly become something that Republicans are either supporting, or if not supporting, is at least not something we feel like fighting.
Yeah, it's not the hill.
What I find really interesting there, Lane, and I would love to hear your thoughts on it, because I mean, I don't know that there ever really was a point in time where truly centrist Republicans loved these Confederate monuments. Like I feel pretty strongly that it always has been sort of a particular fringe of I mean, there are groups of people like the Sons of Confederate Veterans that are super active in this space. And I think that there probably was an era in time where the center was like, I'm not gonna fight that fight. Let them go out there and fight that fight. But what's interesting about what George pointed out is that even that fringe didn't step forward and try to fight. And it was like he said, like a gimme. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I suspect there's probably an element of the central right that's a little bit relieved that they're not having to deal with that. But I'm like, where is the fringe? I mean, are people just ducking and covering? And not that I'm trying to get you to speak for that side of your party, but it does seem surprisingly quiet. I would have also anticipated a little bit of a pushback from the elements that are still there, perhaps not in DeKalb, but absolutely within Georgia.
If I could just
interject, none of that.
If I could interject, I did have someone from the fringe call to curse me out before the show started. So they're out there. They seem to have my number. I don't know if they're calling Mike, but I'll let Lane answer. But I just wanted to point that out.
Well, I don't deny that such people exist, and I don't even deny that they live in DeKalb. We had some folks, who used to be involved in the DeKalb GOP for reasons that were, probably not the best. And, fortunately in my, tenure as chairman, we have gotten those people to not be involved and not claim that they represent DeKalb Republicans. I think that's been a success. I count that as a success that we've had. To your point, Hans, about, these people, it's the centrists, of course, have always existed. And yeah, you're right. I think that certainly in maybe in the past 20 years, you could go back to the 60s or something and maybe have different, views. But in more modern history, yeah, there has not been a lot of centrist Republicans who have wanted to glorify the Confederacy or fly the flags or monuments. But that fringe in the past, one, I think has been bigger, and two, I think has been more influential. They may be small, but they're loud. And there certainly are politicians who would look at that and say, boy, I don't want to have to spend my spring fighting a primary from a, far right, person who's going to oppose all this. I'll just kind of, I won't get into it. I'll leave it alone. I'll just go along. And I think with everything that's happened politically, basically since George Floyd was killed in basically less than a 4-week time period, I think there's just been very little need for any even remotely mainstream politician on the right to have to accommodate that kind of fringe. I think we're getting very close to the point where those beliefs are just no longer part of acceptable mainstream political thought. And
well, let's hope for that.
Well, and yet somebody had to go tell the president, the Republican president, that it wasn't a good idea to have a rally in Tulsa
on Juneteenth.
And so it's probably not a good idea to have a rally anyway because we're in the middle of a pandemic. But his compromise was we're still going to have the rally, but we're going to have it on the. So I mean, Lane, you say that, but the leader of the party is one of not all that dissimilar from the person who called me to cuss me out right before the show. I mean, they're on the same wavelength politically, and I just wonder how do you explain that to voters in DeKalb? DeKalb there are no longer any members of the Republican Party that are part of the legislative delegation in DeKalb right now. They were all voted out. The suburbs are in danger for the Republicans. That is, the polling is consistent there. How do you reconcile? On the one hand, you seem like a very reasonable, smart, open-minded person, but the person who's leading your party is clearly not. How do you reconcile that message in order to try to convince people to vote for your candidates?
Well, in DeKalb, we focus on what's going on in DeKalb. I think one thing that everybody on this call will probably agree with me about with respect to President Trump is that nobody, whether they be a Republican or a Democrat or anything else, has been able to get him to change him being who he is. And in 2016, a lot of people voted for that because they wanted something that was different from the traditional politician. And there are some ways in which he got policy results that a traditional politician might not have achieved. Certainly prior to COVID, the booming economy, low unemployment rates, we had a lot of good stuff going on in this country. I can't sit here and necessarily point by point, go over every single decision the president's made, and I'm certainly not going to go back through his Twitter feed. I think you'll find a lot of the Republicans I know in Metro Atlanta and a lot of us throughout the country do wish that President Trump were let's say a less prolific tweeter and maybe more willing to listen to advice and work with others in his party and in the Democratic Party to get things done instead of being maybe so bombastic. On the other hand, I'm not the one who won an election that everybody said he should have lost, so I'm probably maybe not the one he should be listening to for political advice. So as far as how we sell our message, of course, the economy is difficult right now. COVID's got between government shutdown and people naturally not wanting to go out and spend money and socialize the way they would have before the pandemic occurred. That was a pretty tough pitch. But we have a lot of issues in DeKalb. Let's say prior to 2018, we had very little GOP representation in the DeKalb delegation. We had House District 79, and 80, and then we had one Senate seat, Senate District 40, out of 20 some members. And after 2018, we had none. So we feel like our solutions, maybe for local and statewide problems, could benefit some of the situations that we're having in terms of the government maybe being run more efficiently, making sure that just simple local government issues and state government issues like good roads and well-run schools and things are done properly. So that's what we focus on as a party. Trump is sort of his own creation. He's going to do what he's going to do. I certainly understand people who are unhappy with the way he comports himself in certain situations, and maybe we'd be in a better situation if we had more of a traditional politician in that office. But he doesn't always take advice from even senators and former presidents, so he's sure not going to listen to a county party chair. So well, I try to.
We are going to.
I also don't want to. I mean, I'm going to push you a little bit on it, Lane, because it isn't just Trump. It's not like there's a centrist Republican Party trying to hew the line in the middle, and you've got a president that is divisive and awful. Like, you have a significant number of the national leadership that has either stopped pushing back on Trump or, worse, in my opinion, wholly adopted his approach. And so, I mean, I certainly appreciate the reasonable approach that you're outlining. I mean, I think a Republican Party that is moderate and willing to work with folks deserves to be heard. But I gotta be honest. My reaction to listening to you is that the National Party would call you a rhino, and that to me doesn't that is a problem. Like, I would like a more moderate tone to be able to be struck. I don't want to see people like your perspective being ignored, and yet, I mean, it kind of is.
Well, it's a difficult situation, as you said. He's the president. He's the when your party has an elected president in office, he's looked to as the leader, and I think there's been he won the 2016 election in ways that a lot of people did not expect, and they've felt that hey, this is what the people wanted. Maybe we should try this for a while and see. I would like to even separate from who is the president at any given time. I would like to see legislatures step up a little more and kind of take control of the stuff that the Constitution says they're supposed to do. We never envisioned the president as being an elected king or the guy who's supposed to, make all the decisions and write all the policies. I mean, the first article in the Constitution describes the Congress. And
that's directly in opposition to to Barr, right? To the Attorney General. That is like the opposite of his position, who thinks that the presidency is actually relatively untrammeled power and has aggressively pushed for that. And it's difficult for me to see how we could argue that Attorney General Barr is outside of the Republican mainstream. I mean, he's been a part of it for his entire life. And so you're actually, I'm pleased to hear you say this, because I agree with you. I don't like untrammeled presidential power, but it is actually the national leadership of the Republican Party right now that is currently pushing for relatively untrammeled presidential power.
Yeah, and I just want to add that at the end of the show, we're going to have a segment where Lane is going to personally apologize for everything Trump has tweeted within the last hour. We're gonna cue that up. So get ready.
That would be the next. Yeah. No.
You got a lot unfair. If within the last hour, you've got a lot of work to do. He tweets pretty quickly.
I want to get to some reader comments, if you'll indulge, because this is a reader-driven show. Got a lot of people who voted by mail. Thank you for voting in this election. Vote in every election. I think we can all agree with that. All right. People are asking, where are George and Sarah? They are at a march in Grant Park. George Cheedy is at a march. They're celebrating Juneteenth.
Yeah. Yeah,
Happy Juneteenth.
it's kind of like that. I'm in Summerhill, and by the way, there's a bit of a story here. So, Summerhill got trashed like 3 days ago. Like, so a group of Black Bloc, I'm going to call them anarchists, but let's just call them Black Bloc because I don't know what their politics are. Tried to storm the 3rd precinct house that was, like where Garrett Rolfe was based out of, which is up the street from here in Grant Park. When they couldn't get in and the riot cops came, they walked down this street and they started smashing windows. This is Summerhill. Summerhill is right next to now Georgia State Stadium, used to be Turner Field. And it is in the minds of some gentrified, although there are a lot of Black people who still live in Summerhill. They have been going through a renaissance that's overdue in a lot of ways. Because this community had been forgotten by development and by the powers that be, and they feel it. This community has felt abandoned for a long time. So when you get a bunch of guys coming through in Black Bloc gear with baseball bats and crowbars, smashing things up, the next day, the community came together as a group. They started boarding things up, and then they started painting murals all over the boarding. And I'm going to show you some of them as I'm walking. So that was painted yesterday.
This is in Grant Park?
Summerhill.
Summerhill, okay.
You could tell, like, all the places where they had been.
Oh, that's nice.
Where they had been smashing things, but then they got boarded up and they got rebuilt, sort of. Like, there's still a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of cleaning up to do here. But Summerhill as a community, and I say this from personal experience because this community has kicked my ass personally in the past. I deserved it. This community has kicked my ass personally because they're tight. Summerhill is super duper tight. They do not cotton to people coming in from outside and attempting to impose anything on it whatsoever. I wanted to cite a 24-hour homelessness drop-off center at a building up the street. And normally when there's a community meeting, you get like 20, 25 people who show up. So there are 150 people who show up when I'm trying to propose this. And they all know my name, and they all know where I'm from, and they're all pissed at me. And so to whoever decided that smashing the windows of Summerhill made sense, you're like, Susanna Mitchell, who runs the neighborhood organization here, she's going to find you and she's going to kick your ass. Like, this was painted yesterday. All right. This is not, they're not playing. They're not interested in, like, the Black Bloc politics of, smashy. Like, they're not going to put up for that. Like, people here are going to find out who did this, and it's going to be Pulp Fiction time. It's going to be
Ving Rhames. Yeah, that's tough.
I mean,
the history of Summerhill, it's an incredible community. And I mean, it's more than just neglect, George, right? It's like malignant intent.
Yeah.
Like during the Olympics, the way that the stadium was built in the first place. And you even see, down the road a little bit in Peoplestown, where basically all the effluence that runs off of that area accrues in a giant lake in the middle of it and floods people out of their homes. Like, none of that was accidental. Those were decisions that were made in order to get the Olympics built in time that really damaged those communities. And so their activism is it comes from an incredibly honest place. Like they've seen what happens when you aren't active. And
Wow.
Yeah, I learned that lesson the hard way. It really, running into the Summerhill buzzsaw of community activism was eye-opening. It refocused my interest in getting really deep and understanding a community before you try to tell it what to do. You can't do that. You can't do that in general. You can't do that here.
in Summerhill.
You die. You die, and then you are forgotten.
So this is Dan Wisenhunt, editor and publisher of the Decaturish.com Twitch show. Our guests right now are journalist Crystal Jarvis, contributor and columnist Hans Utz, Lane Flynn, who's the chair of the DeKalb County GOP, and contributor George Cheedy, who is currently at a march in Summerhill where they are celebrating Black Lives Matter and Juneteenth. I wanted to do a quick shout out. If you haven't followed us yet on Twitch, please do. And we're doing really good broadcasts here. And if you
How's it going? I'm all right. I'm on Twitch.
Hey, you're on Twitch
there's
too.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So hey.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So if you know anybody who you think would appreciate this show, let them know about it. We're doing this every Wednesday and Friday at 6. We're putting out some good content. We are putting out some good content about Atlanta. It's informative. People need to see this. It's a cool show, and I hope more people will start watching it. So if you can signal boost us in any way, share us on Facebook, share us on Twitter, send people an email, whatever you have to do. Let's get people watching this show because I think there's something really special going on here, and I think more people need to know about it. Real quick, Crystal, Crystal, at one point during your comments about Juneteenth, you talked about the slaves being moved to Texas for safekeeping. I think that's how you said it. And somebody in the comments said, safekeeping, ? Exclamation points. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's a great question. I'm glad they asked because I didn't delve into that a lot. So what was happening was it was harder for the Union to get to Texas. I'm guessing by way of not having as much technology as we have today, and they had to do that by boat. And also that is pretty much all land in Texas, right? It's not a lot of
small coastline.
Right. Well, yeah, but I guess if I'm looking from the Union standpoint of the East Coast, and okay, I'm going to already tell you all that I'm logistically challenged. But if you were coming from the East Coast, let's say Boston, you would have to kind of go around in a ship, right?
Texas was not in the direction that a lot of armies were marching from the north, right? So it's not surprising at all that word got out there late. Or no, word got out there in time. People who could enforce the word got out there.
Oh, right. Absolutely. That's exactly right. So it was actually the enforcement was happening. So what was happening was a lot of slave owners, because a lot of other places were being, a lot of other places where slaves were freed and the Union had taken over and had won in those areas, they were moving their slaves to Texas because it was harder to get to them. So basically, just in case we, win this war, we'll have our slaves and we won't have the Union to take them from us. That's what was happening. So it was safekeeping in the interest of the landowners and the slave owners, not in the interest of the slaves.
Yeah, so the right word would be unsafe keeping, really, right? From like a moral standpoint.
Right, you're absolutely correct. So yes, that was a very good question.
Dr. Zoss, who also posted that question, said, the cemetery and funerary rituals was a wonderful part of that story. Thank you for that great story, Crystal Jarvis.
Oh, Thank you very much. I always get your wonderful readers always take time out of their day to email me or leave comments regarding the stories that I write, which lets me know that this partnership that we've created is great. This is exactly what my idea was for it, is, to really shed light on a lot of things that's happening around us. And that was a very fun story to write. So thank you very much.
La Vera says there are definitely a lot of racist and hard right people in DeKalb County. I know one of them called me before the show. Dr. Zoss also asked, what else needs to be removed in the square? Specifically, I'm thinking about the Confederate sympathetic markers that describe battles in the area. What will happen to those? George, do you want to weigh in on this? Do you have any thoughts about what should happen to the other markers?
Sorry, I'm in a spot where I may have to break away.
Okay.
Because parade marshal grabbed me. I think she wants me to say something. I don't know. You're talking about other things that need to be removed from the square?
Yeah. What else needs to be removed?
Parking. We should get rid of all the parking and force everybody to walk, and or take MARTA. Like, just be radical about it. That's my opinion. Aside from that, so there's talk about getting rid of there's a Thomas Jefferson statue. I think that's a stretch. I don't think there's a whole lot in the Decatur Square that needs to go away. I think there are other statues elsewhere that need to go away, frankly, starting with the one at the Capitol.
So there's a cannon from what they call the Indian Wars that's there that probably maybe should be rethought. I don't think that it's inappropriate to have markers describing.
Hans, I'm sorry to interrupt. I have to break away, guys.
All right.
Okay. I'm glad I've been here. You guys are awesome.
All right. See you later, George.
Bye-bye.
Good talking to you. George Cheedy, everybody.
Did he just put it in his pocket without? There he goes.
Yeah. I muted it for him.
Thanks. Okay, good. Yeah, because he's still there.
It's George Cheedy's,
I think
Cheedy's pocket.
I think it's appropriate for there to be markers describing historical battles. I mean, it is the DeKalb Historical Center, and there was fighting literally in front of the courthouse. Like, I don't think it's inappropriate to have some acknowledgement and descriptors of that. I think maybe the way that we would describe it might be differently from when those were erected in the 50s and 60s or whenever they were put up, and it maybe it's worth rethinking that. But I don't know that it's. There was actually a Civil War battle in front of the courthouse, and acknowledging that I don't think is a problem. It's as long as we're doing it in a way that's appropriate.
Another question for the panel. Does anyone on the panel think that we can get the Georgia flag changed so that it no longer replicates the national official flag of the Confederacy? I am ignorant about this issue, so I'm going to let other people who know more
Can I weigh in here?
Yes, please. So
the history of this, if folks remember, I'm going to get the years wrong, 2001-ish, I want to say. Roy Barnes, the old Georgia flag, very similar to the Mississippi flag right now, had the stars and bars, like the Confederate battle flag. And so just so we're precise in our terminology, that was the Army of Northern Virginia battle flag, is the stars and bars that we consider the Confederate flag in common knowledge. That was very prominently on the Georgia flag. Roy Barnes managed to change the flag so that it was I think it was the seal of Georgia on a field of blue. And along the bottom, it had, in very, very smaller shape, a series of flags representing the history of Georgia flags, including the most recent flag that actually had the stars and bars on it, which basically everyone hated. Like the far right and the people are like, it still has the stars and bars. Sonny Perdue came into office with a promise to fix the flag, and was surprisingly vague on what he meant by that. And what he instead did was actually institute the Georgia flag, which we have right now. If you Google the flag of the Confederacy, not the battle flag, not the Northern Virginia Stars and Bars battle flag, but the actual flag of the Confederacy of the the Confederate States of America. It's the Georgia flag. I mean, it's just the Georgia flag. And that's how Sonny Perdue got it through, because all of the people that really wanted to honor the Confederacy, he was like, look, nobody knows what the Confederate flag looks like. We're just going to do the Confederate flag, and we'll put the little seal of Georgia on the side of it. But you'll have your Confederate flag. We just won't have the stars and bars on it, and nobody will know that was the Virginia flag anyway. So that made all of the crazies happy. But now people are starting to look at it and say, God, like, the Georgia flag actually looks more like the Confederate flag than the old Georgia flag looks like the Confederate flag. So I think it's probably an awfully big lift to expect that to change sometime soon. But I would say this last month has taught me, if the last month has taught me anything, things can change awfully, awfully quickly.
And if they want to, I think that's the case. That's the case. What I want to ask, because you were talking about other things that need to be removed. The rapper Killer Mike actually brought up the Confederate monument in Stone Mountain, and that's a long time goal for him to have that removed. What is the consensus on whether or not that will actually be touched? Because it is a very big monument that people come.
Well, I don't want to speak for George, but he did say in our last interview that it's his opinion that it is one of the largest monuments of its kind in the world, and so it has significance from that perspective. But it's also celebrating a bunch of people who wanted to keep slaves, so there's that as well.
Right.
I've heard people suggest maybe just remove the soldiers but leave the horses, since the horses didn't know any better, which actually makes a lot of sense. And I like horses, so that might actually work. But
I think it changes the entire dynamic of that monument. And in some aspects it would have to, that entire monument would have to kind of change, and how much money would go into that, who's going to pay for that. Those are very interesting questions.
I look, at a personal level, I don't particularly like monuments to the Confederacy. I think it's a travesty. I think that we're celebrating traitors, but you know, in my mind, there is a difference between celebrating traitors on public land that is meant to be reserved to honor people that the public, you know, either aspires to be or that venerates, versus when you have something on private land. And my
Stone Mountain considered private?
I think it is. I might could be wrong on this, and so somebody can jump in and correct me on this, but I don't believe that Stone Mountain is public land in the same way that, like, the DeKalb courthouse.
I think it's run by a land trust, if I remember correctly. I think
which is a convenient way to say it's no longer public, but kind of still funded by the public, right?
Right. Wow.
Well, I mean, look, it's a part of the conversation on whether or not we want to venerate. It's impossible to say that Stone Mountain is not venerating. It is designed to venerate. And so do we feel that it is appropriate that we venerate these individuals from the Confederacy? I don't think it's appropriate that we venerate them.
Lane, you're real quiet. What do you think?
Well, I'm listening. I don't have to talk all the time.
I do have a question.
It's, you know, moving statues and monuments to the Confederacy out of the public square is you know, probably something whose time has come. With Stone Mountain, of course, you really can't move it because it's, you know, 1 trillion tons or whatever of granite. And I do think there's, even if we don't want to memorialize the actions of the men who were, carved into it. There's artistic value in the existence of it and in the creation of it. It was an engineering feat to build that. We've heard ideas about, carve Martin Luther King Jr. into the monument, or put Outcast up there. And again, nice ideas, but it's so hard to carve these massive things into granite that's probably not practical either. So I'm not sure the removal is either practical nor is really ideal, since it really can't be done without destroying it. So with something like that, I think probably the least bad solution is to contextualize it, put historical markers and information and have tour guides in the park who can, talk about here's who these people were, here's what they did, here's who the people are who created this carving, here's why they did that, here's the historical background behind that, and use it as a platform, from which to teach history. I think honestly that's the best choice, because even destroying it might be difficult, because again, it's just this massive block of granite, and it would take a pretty substantial effort, even if you did just want to blast it out of the face of that. So that's where I am. I can't claim to speak for every conservative or every Republican, but I'm okay with moving stuff that can be moved when something can't and has artistic value outside of what who the people were who it's meant to memorialize. Then I think probably the best outcome is maybe to contextualize it and use it as a chance to educate people.
I'd like to take a minute to mourn the battery on George's cell phone.
He does always.
It is still on.
Here's why.
He is still in the chat, and he is going to be very sad when he realizes his phone has been on this whole time.
Right.
So
I know he mentioned one time he was out of battery while he was recording somewhere.
We now have evidence as
happened.
to why. Yes.
Right.
So I do want to, Lane, I'm kind of pleased to hear you say the comments that you made about it, right? I mean, I think that in lieu of destruction, because that's the only other, right? There is no moving. It's destroy.
Right.
I'd vote for destroy, but I recognize that that's going to be a bigger conversation. In the interim, we can at least contextualize. But I thought that the plaque that DeKalb County put up in front of the CSA monument was a phenomenal example of appropriate contextualization. Like, it really didn't leave any room for doubt as to the point of that monument. The challenge at Stone Mountain, of course, is that none of that is happening. Like, Stone Mountain is still very much a beat the drum on the lost cause veneration of these people and this great history of the state of Georgia. And so there's I wish more folks of your persuasion that would have that perspective that you put forward, because I think a great start is at least describing the monument the way it is, not the way that we wish it were.
I want to.
I think Chris. But I do want to add that while it would be hard to see something with artistic value go away, I still strongly feel that, it's not representative of where we're trying to go. So there's been many things. I mean, some of these monuments that are being moved and statues that are being thrown into the river in the UK, they all had artistic value to them. But they represented something that is hurtful to a lot of people. This article right here that's sitting on my desk in my office, I wrote when I was in college. This article is about when I would go to football games when I was a student at Auburn University, and when people would drive down the road with the Confederate flags on their trucks. That hurt me as a Black person, and I wrote about it. And then I started getting fan mail, just like Dan does, from someone who completely disagreed with my point of view. But it is from a point of view of someone who I can't even go back to my great-great-grandparents because of slavery. I don't know really who I am or where I come from. I won't even go and get a DNA kit test because it would piss me off to know what part of Africa I'm from and have never touched it and have never been there. These things and these people are actually a part of why we are where we are. One thing that I definitely want to say is that I even saw an article and social media, as much as we're seeing a lot of progress happen, it's also still hurtful to go through and hear a lot of people. We need to see it. We need to hear it, how they feel about us. I am having a hard time sometimes trying to understand why someone hates me because of the color of my skin, because of what I view as adaptation, because we're from one of the hottest climates in the world. I have melanin in my skin. So therefore, a lot of these things don't represent things that are positive for someone like me. And so if I go to Stone Mountain for a run, I have to look at all of these people that are being glorified for wanting to keep slaves. And then not only do you keep them, but then they've been free for 2 years. And you literally use them to say, I'm going to harvest, you get my last harvest out of them. And then you turn them into sharecroppers to where they still were slaves. So this is, and I think what is also so hurtful, I'm going to stop talking soon, but what is also
Keep
so
talking.
hurtful is I saw someone who actually, they interviewed this guy from Mississippi who said that Black people have been dependent on America since slavery. That is the most ignorant statement that anybody could ever make. If you guys really want to understand historically that Martin Luther King actually said that we have been stigmatized by the color of our skin, when a lot of people don't even realize that when white peasants actually came over here, they were given land to cultivate for free. So when we were actually freed, we were freed to starve. We were freed with nothing. A lot of the people that I do know and a lot of the people that are successful around me and in my life, we have done it with all of the oppression that we still didn't even realize was affecting us to this day. My degree, my accomplishments, a lot of times I will still beat myself up for certain things. But the thing is I have actually accomplished things against the odds of what were already stacked against me, simply for being Black. And that is why those monuments, regardless of how beautiful they are and how that's great. But we're in a new day, a new age. Some of that stuff has to go. Some of that stuff cannot be revered in the same way because these same thoughts, these same feelings, which have no basis to them whatsoever, will keep happening. We will never change. We truly won't.
Crystal, I'm reading the comments, and I think the only objection that people have is that you went to Auburn? How did I not know this?
You did know this. This was a big thing in the newsroom.
I did.
You probably forgot, but that's okay.
No, Ben Stunk, you reminded me, and then Ben Stunkel said, "Roll Tide, Crystal." So.
Oh no, I did. I will admit that I did actually spend time in Tuscaloosa as a reporter for the Tuscaloosa News, because they like Auburn graduates.
Good journalism.
Well, because you guys could write.
Right.
I'm right here.
That's what they
I'm right here. So, I want to switch gears a little bit. Our intern, Alex Brown, is in our chats, and she went. So last night we heard the monument was coming down, and Alex and I had just had a conversation at 8 because Mike Thurman was going to have a press conference today, and I was like, I think they're going to take the monument down tomorrow. Why don't you go ahead and go to the press conference and see what he has to say? And then, like, an hour later, I get the call, the monument's going to come down. So I called Alex, and I said, hey, do you want to go write the first draft of history again? Because that's what she's been doing through her whole internship. So she gets on her bike. Her bike has a flat tire. She rides her bike with her flat tire to the square. She films the whole thing until her cell phone dies, and then some good Samaritan in the crowd gave her another cell phone charger so she could finish filming the monument coming down. And then she gets up this morning and she goes to Mike Thurman's press conference anyway to see what he has to say. So I just want to give her a round of applause for just generally kicking ass at her internship, and she and I are talking, and she wants to stick around and cover some more Decatur stuff for us, which is great. We could definitely use her. We're a little bit over an hour. Does everybody want to talk for a little bit longer, or do y'all have other things you need to do? Lane, you good? Hans?
I'm good for a little more.
Crystal, you good?
I'm good. I'm just going to run to the grocery store later. So
well, we'll wrap it up in about 15.
Okay, yeah,
Can I just? I mean, I want to. Crystal, I just thank you so much for sharing your perspective. That you,
yes,
I found that particularly powerful.
Oh, thank you.
And you know, it needs to be said, and we need to hear it, right? But at the end of the day, I think you nailed it. That this isn't about artistic merit. This is about veneration of an atrocious time in our history. And you either think it's an atrocious time in our history or you venerate it.
Right.
And look, there isn't the middle ground there.
Yeah.
It's time for that to stop.
Yeah. And I just think in terms of unity, I mean, this is something like, for instance, Juneteenth. This is something we need you all. We need everyone to help with this. We need white allies. You guys, your voice in some instances, and you hate to even say it, is the honest truth, is far more powerful than ours at times. We need you on our side, if that makes any sense. I mean, because that's how things are going to truly change. It can't just be us. It can't just be, us out in the streets. It can't be us, I think when we first even started talking, even before we got on Twitch, we were saying how our societies have been built since, I guess we would say after Christ, but, in the 800s, they were built on these hierarchies that still exist to this day. And, to break through some of those barriers, we need help from everyone to do that. So thank you for, recognizing that. But I'm definitely, I personally, because I have a 10-year-old, we have been locked away in this cave for a long time due to coronavirus. But this is my way of, fighting this fight with everyone else, is to try to write, to try to educate, to try to lend my words to anyone who will hear me. So thank you for listening to that. I really appreciate that.
Well, we appreciate you being here and
thank you,
sharing
Dan.
your time with us. And for Crystal has been contributing. I was so happy when Crystal called me and said, "Hey, I want to write stuff for you." I was like, "Yes, thank you." Because I've worked with
She's from Auburn.
Well, that aside, she's not our only Auburn grad contributor. Kathy Harris went to Auburn too, and I'm willing to forgive both of y'all. But
okay.
Crystal, I mean, I've worked with Crystal before. I knew, her copy could be published in any AP story, and it's always solid. And
thank you.
Yeah, I was like, yay! We have experienced people. So I have a couple of questions. For Lane, actually. From ELP2318, why does the Republican Party continue to conflate the stock market with economic well-being? The deficit spiraled after control after these policy decisions that the president pushed through. Lane, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I'm, as are a lot of other Republicans, very displeased with what's going on with the deficit, and I will certainly acknowledge this was not a problem that, just came about in the past 4 months, but it has been really, really substantially exacerbated by the large amounts of spending that we've done for COVID relief. And frankly, that spending is something that was pretty universally supported by everybody. I mean, if you're going to lock people in their houses and not let them go to work, you're going to have to give them some money, or they're not going to be able to eat. That's something that we're going to absolutely have to reckon with. On the stock market point, yeah, that does probably tend to be overused as an indicator of overall economic health. I don't think it's the only one we look to. It's certainly not the only one that the Republicans look to when we talk about economic results. We look at unemployment. Also, we look at inflation, and by most metrics, again, prior to COVID, which completely changed everything, both those numbers were very good also. So I will agree with the comment that it probably gets overused. I will disagree that it's the only metric that we use.
Well, we still haven't got to the segment where I'm going to ask you to apologize for everything Trump did this week. But if you would agree to come back and be a guest on our show again, maybe we can do that. Would you like to join us again, Lane, if you ever got time?
Love to come back. Not sure I can defend every single tweet, but maybe we can find something else.
Can you defend Vanderbilt's football team? That's an even harder challenge.
We are undefeated this year. Have not lost a game in 2020.
We're all in that boat. Another fun fact about Lane is he was actually on Jeopardy. One of the many guests on Jeopardy that live in our area. How many games did you win?
I won twice.
You won twice. And what were your cash and prizes takeaway, if you don't mind me asking?
Right around $40,000.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's pretty cool. Well, at some point, I want to get all the Jeopardy, because we actually have quite a few Jeopardy. Maybe we could have a Jeopardy edition of the Twitch show. I don't know. What do you think?
That would be fine.
Yeah, we could have Lane and a couple of the other, and maybe we could do like a fundraiser for a charity. That would be kind of cool. Well, if you're tuning in, we're getting ready to wrap up here. This is the Decaturish.com Twitch show. It has been such a great hour and a half. We have had wonderful guests. We've had journalist Crystal Jarvis. We've had contributor Hans Utz. We've had GOP chair Lane Flynn. And we've also had a great view of the inside of George Cheaty's pocket for the better part of 15 minutes. I guess he realized that was on, so he turned it off, or his phone died. Either way, we will see him next time. I hope, Crystal, I hope you can join us again. Hans, we know you'll be there.
Absolutely.
Thank all of you for watching. We are going to, unless some news happens, which the news has been happening a lot, we're going to be back this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're going to work on that lineup for you. If you have suggestions of guests that you would like to see, let me know. Hit me up at editor@decaturish.com. If you are watching us but don't have a Twitch account, please sign up for a Twitch account. Give us a follow. If you are following us, you have a Twitch account, please help us spread the word about the show, because this episode is a great example of why this format is so good for having really nice, productive discussions about things. You know, we're not limited to sound bites. We can talk for any length of time. We can actually find points to agree to disagree about. So it's a really good format, and I hope that more people will check it out. So I'm gonna let y'all go. Crystal, Hans, Lane, thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and we are gonna see y'all on Wednesday. Thank you so much.